Hi, my name is Victor and I am a mindfulness instructor. And in this video, I'm going to briefly cover the states that we will be developing within this program. And I'd rather address those states as skills. So those are abilities that we can train and cultivate. Now, in pretty much the same way that normal, usual technologies enhance our physical abilities, so for example, a microscope is an enhancement of our sight, the same with the telescope. So in pretty much the same way, the psychotechnologies enhance our cognitive, perceptual abilities. And it is a word, the psychotechnologies, that was proposed by John Vervaeke, a Canadian cognitive scientist and a professor of the University of Toronto. So he speaks of different psychotechnologies that were developed throughout the ages, throughout the history of humankind, in order to enhance our natural abilities. So, for example, a square root, a mathematical concept, is not something that we can find in the objective world. It cannot be seen, it cannot be heard, it cannot be touched. And yet, when we learn about this concept, it enhances our abilities drastically. We can do things that we couldn't do without it before. And it doesn't come just by being born to people. It has to be learned, it has to be taught, and then it can be used. So in pretty much the same way, there are other internal psychological abilities that can be developed to extraordinary degrees, and that people throughout the ages have been developing to extraordinary degrees, first and foremost in the contemplative traditions, East and West. So since the ancient times, people have noticed that there are different states of mind, of body, of emotions that are more beneficial to our living, that can help us to achieve better results, live a less stressful and more resilient, more grounded, more meaningful life. And in this program, we're going to group them into three categories. So one category is attentional skills, another category is self-regulatory skills, bodily states and skills, and the third group is attitude skills. We call them here mind states, body states, and emotional states. But I prefer to use the word skills because it denotes that it is something that we do, and it is something that we can do better with training. So state is what I experience. Skill is how I get into a certain state, is how I stay in that beneficial state, is how I prolong it from inside, and how I use and utilize it to do whatever I deem useful and relevant and right. Now, what do we mean when we talk about attentional skills? So let me ask you a question. How do you know that you are alive right now? Well, probably that's because you hear something, you feel something, you see something, basically because you are aware that something is happening to you. That's how we know that we are alive. But how many times throughout the day we actually don't know what's happening to us? We don't know what we feel, we don't know what we think about. So there are many different things that we can perceive, but what's certain is that anything that happens to us is a function of our attention. In this program, we take two basic skills. One is concentration or concentration power, the ability to direct our attention, to concentrate upon what we deem relevant at a certain time, to stay present with that certain thing for as long as we need to. and that's concentration and being present and being in contact. And the other aspect is clarity aspect. So how well do we know whatever is happening? How clear and precise we are about what we feel, what we think, what we see, and so on. Do you feel the touch of the clothes to your skin? Do you feel the way you're breathing? So in order to answer those questions, you have to become aware of those perceptions. You have to be present, you have to stay in contact. And the longer you stay in contact, the better you understand, the more clear you become. For example, I can ask you another question. What do you feel right now? Can you name a state, an emotion you're in? Say, are you tired or full of energy? Do you feel composed or scattered? Do you feel sad or happy? Now, we can get more clear about that and try to answer the question, whatever the state is, whatever the answer is, how do you know that that is what you experience? Probably because it is something that you notice in the body. Maybe it is something that you notice in your thoughts, in your head. Say we have sad thoughts, and that's why we understand that we are sad. Or you're tensing your stomach, tensing your muscles, and that's how you understand you feel more depressed. So that is very important, that whatever is happening to us is a function of our attention, of our abilities to direct our attention, to maintain our concentration power on whatever we deem relevant for as long as we deem relevant. And by way of doing so, we begin to perceive things in a much clearer way. So clarity is usually better than confusion. Being concentrated and composed is usually better than being scattered, and when your attention is just behaving by itself, jumping from subject to subject. So in this program, we will offer you a few ways, a few mindfulness exercises to develop concentration power and clarity. But it is clearly not enough to just be clear and precise and be attentive. Because a very important aspect of our well-being is how well we cope with all that, how we digest whatever we perceive. So something's happening to us. Now, does it break us? Does it make us feel content? Does it bring satisfaction? Does it bring pain and suffering? Well, to a large extent, it depends on our bodily abilities to digest, to bear, to embrace. Nowadays, there is a lot of talk about trauma and trauma sensitivity, trauma awareness, and it is a very important subject. But in essence, what is trauma? Is when something is happening too fast and too strong, and our abilities to deal with it, to process it is not as fast or as strong. And then something breaks and stays. So there are certain exercises, mindfulness exercises, that can make us uh, more efficient in digesting any and ultimately every stressful situation that we find ourselves in. And yet, these coping skills are also not enough. It turns out, and many years ago, thousands of years ago, people have discovered that there are certain emotional attitudes, emotional states that color our life with meaning. So, for example, I see something clearly, I self-regulate well, but what do I make of it? How do I relate to those situations? Do I see them as God's punishment or life's lessons to be learned, or maybe life's presence to enjoy? Ultimately, it is this attitude and those beneficial states that make our life meaningful and that color our life in colors that we want it to be. So, for example, a state of being interested and curious is usually more pleasurable and more enjoyable than a state of boredom. So if I ask you if you want to spend some time being bored or being curious and interested, probably your answer is, well, curious and interested. Do you want to feel resentment and fear or anger? Or do you want to feel kindness and heartfulness and compassion and tenderness? Again, arguably, we all want to spend more time with those more nourishing states rather than with being fearful or resentful and so forth. Now, again, those are not just states. Thousands of years ago, people discovered that those can be cultivated, that those also are states that we can train ourselves to become more open, more receptive, more loving, more compassionate, more curious, and so on. So, in this program, we will explore different ways of building up our attentional skills, being present, being aware, being composed, being able to direct our attention to whatever we deem relevant, being clear about what we feel, what we see, what we think of, being able to cope with all this better, being able to process whatever we see. And unfortunately, there are many things that cannot be unseen once they're seen, but we can learn to become bigger and more wide and to embrace it more and be more present. And finally, we can train certain attitudes. How do we relate to whatever we see and process? So I wish you all good luck in this program, and may it bring benefit to your lives and through your lives and through your actions to many others.